into economic growth, whether it's China increasing at 7, 10%, and we know there's tremendous problems with environmental change in China. What are we going to do? Wait 50 years and then wait for China to clean up? Or India to drive and take everybody out of poverty and then clean up? Because that's what the idea is, that the idea that this is what happened in Europe and the States, and it didn't happen. So we can't just drive economically and then later resolve socio-ecological problems. We have to do everything in conjunction. And this fits into this idea of certain ideas around ecological modernization. Ecological modernization as a term emerges with German sociologists in the 1970s, including, and Dutch, Martin Heyer. And the idea of ecological modernization is we don't really have to change the capitalist system, we can just add things on. Environmental management, good environmental management, sound environmental management is going to resolve these problems. We don't have to really change the nature of the fossil fuel economy, the nature of urban development, rural development, intensification of agriculture. We just have to be responsible and add in good environmental management systems. And I think that's a bluff. It's not real. It hasn't happened. The motor, the driver of that economic development generates tremendous externalities. Climate change is a central, fundamental problem of capitalist-led fossil fuel growth. And my problem is about ecological modernization and certain ideas about eco-efficiency. For example, Factor 10, which is a Carbon Declaration, Brundtland participated in that, and there's some very good things in that, saying it's an industrialized country problem. It's not a global problem. Emissions per capita, total emissions, total use of resources, use of nature is so much higher in the industrialized countries. It's not going to be enough just to incrementally improve 1 to 5% in terms of reduction of emissions, because in terms of how we balance out welfare and consumption of nature, the way we transfer nature into, we commodify nature and use nature. What happens in non-renewable resource economies, like Chile's, for example? How do we deal with that? And what happens, for example, the boomerang effect, where as we become more efficient in these things, suddenly prices fall, and then suddenly people start consuming more. So I think there's some fundamental problems in this. It's very positive, but it's not enough. It's very relative. If we increase 5% in our ability to really cut emissions, which hasn't happened in climate change, that's why there's no replacement for the Protocol of Kyoto. That's why we should be focusing very much on adaptation and not worry too much about mitigation, because no one seems to be mitigating enough. And Ernst von Weizsäcker, in his book Factor 4, which is trying to say how can we reduce consumption of nature by half and double welfare, which is what we want. I'm not denying this is what we want, these basic ideas. But I think working through a capitalist system, the capitalist system we have at the moment, and saying we can do this incrementally, in a very relative way, certain percentages, when all the information we have shows that this isn't happening. And this isn't new. We've had this idea for 25 years. Because it's the essential component of the response to Rio 92. So we need something a bit more profound, a bit more absolute. And I think, rather than this idea of some sort of these incremental ideas, and the problem is these incremental ideas, they don't really define between different types of things. There are certain things, in terms of resources, in terms of consumption patterns, or whatever, products, that we need, and services, that we need to start eliminating from our supply chain. At the moment, we're in a decade.
That is the one big issue. Long-term goal and short-term target, you have to look at your future goal. However, in some cases, long-term goal and short-term target, for example, clean up this water or clean up this solid waste, could be different from your ultimate target. Ultimate target should be your world without consuming much material. However, you have to solve the problem today. So you have to think long side and short side. Let me see. One of the figure we propose several years ago in University of Tokyo is linkage among three systems. Here, I am showing global system, social system, and human system. There are many ways of categorizing system, but here I would like to mention that one. And the purpose of this figure is to show how these systems are interacting, right? It is not separate. If you look at the low carbon society, to prevent climate change, you have to reduce carbon dioxide emission. And here you have to look at least global system, climate system, and the social system, which includes politics, economy, and industry and technology, to reduce carbon dioxide emission, or to reduce energy supply or material consumption. You have to think both. For resource circulating society, which I will explain later, to avoid consumption of material, to avoid consumption of resources. You need both social system and human system, which include your lifestyle, health, and norms and value. Right? Consumption of material very much depends on your behavior. And also it depends on your politics, economy. And the last one is environmental risk and management. And now these different issues are coming together. So you have to look at
start a process in which we literate ourselves about the ecological environment in which we live, ecological principles, systemic principles. The second one is focus on vulnerable communities. Who really cares about vulnerable communities in a neoliberal country? Who really cares about it? Third, bioregional urbanization. We've been talking about these boundaries between urban and rural environment. We talk so naturally about the built environment and the natural environment in our planning institutions. Well, there is not boundaries, not really boundaries. So we really need to create a more bioregional form of planning. The third one is transdisciplinarity. It's not interdisciplinarity, it's not multidisciplinarity, but it's transdisciplinarity. Interdisciplinarity would be, I don't know, relationship between chemistry, ecology, sociology. But transdisciplinarity is going from this place to the place of local action or actions, up until the domain of values. We need to connect ethics with technological things. Every time in which we make this kind of roads, this kind of connection, we're making a transdisciplinarity exercise. Then citizen participation in decision-making process. Localization means creating direct democracy, means really establishing and give the active or give the tools to people to create their own lives. They are the designer of their communities. Global collaborative networking. Localism is not isolation. Does not mean isolating ourselves from the global world, but it means really creating a perspective to participate in this global economy. And international cooperation, international networking is absolutely essential for this. All the local movements, like transition time movements, eco-villages movements, have this networking of collaboration, and they teach us, they teach each other in a very, very, very active way.
Development in the context, which is an emergent context in the last few decades, and is receiving increasing attention in recent years, which is that of climate change. But to begin, just very briefly to put things in perspective, when we talk about geological scales of time, if we look at this graphic which depicts the history of life on the planet since its very beginning in the most simple forms of bacteria and single-celled organisms, all the way up until the present day, what we can see is that human beings have been around as a life form on this planet for what is, in absolute terms, a very, very, very short amount of time. There's an exercise that if you compress the entire evolution of life on Earth into one day, the entire span of our recorded human history only occurs in the last few seconds before midnight on that day. So in that way, we've really only been here for a very, very short time, but we've also been very, very busy. This is a depiction of the evolution of human population. And as you can see, only in the past 200 years, we've experienced a population explosion, something that is unprecedented, that we have no experience with, and that presents several very significant and important challenges, especially considering that the projections of future population growth will only amplify the challenges that we're currently facing today. As this expanding population demands increasing amounts of resources, we can see that that puts additional strains on the natural environment, the source of all of the resources that we need for economic growth and social development. This is a graph that shows GDP growth since in the last century, and also the consumption of different kinds of natural resources, coal, oil, gas, various kinds of minerals, etc. So we can see that growth, development, modernity, all of these amazing systems that have emerged in the last 2 centuries have also come at a great cost. Often these costs are hidden, are not very evident, but increasingly they become unavoidable. And we've gotten to the point where geologists across the world have come to the conclusion, many of them have come to the conclusion that we are living in a time that deserves its own geological era, a new geological era, which they aptly named the Anthropocene, meaning that there is no place on this planet today that has not been touched in some way, shape, or form by human activities. This is just a series of different graphs displaying various indicators that show the exponential increase and the exponential increase in impacts of human activities on the natural world. So this brings us to kind of the context for the emergence of the concept of sustainable development and sustainability, which is based on a very simple but very important principle, which is the idea that as our population and our demand and our consumption of resources grows exponentially, it inevitably bumps up against natural limits, because we live on a planet that does not grow. The planet is finite. And so in that way, this forms kind of the context for the emergence of this concept of sustainability. Right? The Brundtland Commission, part of the National Assembly of the United Nations, was convened